Good afternoon, class. In this presentation, I'll be going over the POP3S protocol and the SMTPS protocol. Inside the presentation, I'll be talking more specifically about configuring POP3 on the Dovecot, as well as some hardening recommendations for that. And then I'll be talking about configuring SMTPS on ISS for Windows with some hardening recommendations. And then finally, I'll be talking about configuring SMTPS on the postfix for Linux, and then some hardening recommendations for that as well. So I hope you enjoy. What is POP3S? So POP3S is the Post Office Protocol. 3 stands for version 3, and the S means secure. So POP3 provides access to the email inbox and the email server. It's a one-way client-server protocol, and POP3 would be in port 110, and it's a TCP port for POP3, whereas POP3S would be port 995, and it's a TLS or SSL port that offers a little bit more security. So POP3, the data is unencrypted, and POP3S, the data would be encrypted. So the way that the way connection works on a POP3, it's in 4 steps. The first step would be the client connects to the server, which is the authorization state. The next step would be the client retrieves new emails, which is a transaction state. The third step is the server deletes the stored messages, which is the update state. And the last step would be the client disconnects from the server. So POP3 is only able to retrieve emails, but one of the good things about it is it can be done offline. So that's why it's a one-way client-server protocol, because it can just retrieve mail, which is a little bit different than some of the other protocols. Configuring POP3S on Dovecot. So Dovecot actually wasn't initially designed for POP3, but it was designed for IMAP. But you can still use POP3 on Dovecot. So the way you would set it up, you would go to your terminal and you would type sudo apt install dovecot-pop3d. So run that command and you would install Dovecot for POP3. Now when you install it, Dovecot comes with default configurations that will get their server up and running, so you don't initially have to do any configuring to get it working. It'll automatically come configured. However, I do have an example for one thing you could do to configure it. So this would be if you wanted to set up your mailbox directory. So you would go in the terminal and you would type sudo nano /etc/conf/d/10-mail.conf. And inside there, you would be opening up the nano editor, which is where you can do some configuration. So if you wanted to change the mail location, which is the place where the location that would be storing the user's email messages. So if you did want to change that, just make sure that's in a secure location that has a lot of free space. But the way you do that is you would go to where it says mail_location, and you would just set it equal to, so it would be mail_location equals mail dir, then :/mail dir. So that's setting it up in the mail directory, which is a very common place to have your mail location. Hardening recommendations for Dovecot. The first thing I have here is disabling plain text authentication by typing in disable plain text auth auth equals yes in the terminal. And this requires SSL for authentication, which prevents password leaks. The second hardening recommendation I have is installing anti-spam. You do this by typing sudo apt install dovecot-anti-spam in the terminal. Now what's interesting about that command is it looks very similar to the install command for Dovecot. So one of the nice things about Dovecot is it's set up in a way where it's very easy to install and modify. So a lot of the commands actually look like that. When you're modifying certain things, you would just be typing in sudo apt install dovecot-, and then where I have anti-spam, there's several different things you can install just by typing them in there. So you just change out anti-spam for whatever you're trying to install. And the last thing I have is SSL equals required. So the two differences between SSL equals required and the first recommendation I gave was SSL equal required. It guarantees that the entire connection is protected against eavesdropping. So that's a very good command for hardening Dovecot. Now the disable plaintext auth equals yes. That just guarantees that the password will be protected from eavesdropping. But the last command I have, SSL equals required, would be the best command to use. Now, Dovecot was developed with security in mind, so there's not a whole lot of things from what I could see that you could do to really harden the system because it does come pretty hardened as is, but those are a few hardening recommendations that I have for you. What is SMTPS? SMTPS is the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol Secure. Much like, there's a little bit of a pattern. Anytime there's an S at the end of something, it seems like it's always for secure. But SMTPS is a secure version of SMTP, and it works with either TLS or SSL, which is SSL, something I referenced back on the previous slide. But SMTPS encrypts the messages, it provides authentication, it ensures data integrity and confidentiality, it runs on various different ports, and it uses asymmetric cryptography. Now, something I did want to mention with the ports, I found interesting. So we'll start with the first port, port 465. So port 465 is still supported by a lot of providers, but it's actually no longer the accepted standard. Port 587, that is the default SMTP port for submissions, and it supports secure transmission through the transport layer security. Port 25, that was the port that when I heard SMTP, initially thought it was port 25, and that's it's good for SMTP relay, but it's not a port for SMTP submission. The last port I have is 2525, and it's not an official SMTP port, but it is a good port to use as an alternative. Configuring SMTPS on IIS. There's two things I have here, configuring SMTP logging and configuring email routing. What I'll do is I'll go through the steps to complete both of those tasks. So for configuring SMTP logging, what that'll do is it's good for troubleshooting any mail delivery problems that you could have. And it's what it is. It's logging. It logs the issues, and you can set what you want for it to record, but I'll get into that later. So in order to set this up, you will need to, in your IIS manager, right-click on the SMTP virtual server and then select properties. From there, you're going to see tabs on the top of the screen, and you're going to be in general. And you'll see something that says IP address, and you can just click unassigned for that and hit OK. You're going to want to make sure that there's a box that says enable logging. You want to check that. And then for the active log format, you can choose, it's called W3C extended log file format. Click on that and then select properties. From there, you're going to be able to see how often do you want your system to log what it's seeing. So it's called the log schedule. You can do it hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. And then in the log file directory, you can choose where you want the log files to be stored. So by default, it's going to be stored in the Windows System 32 log files. It would be a good idea to move it outside of there, but that's up to you. But once you pick the log file directory, you'll hit OK, and it's going to take you to the last place you'll be, and that's where you're going to actually check the fields that you want to log. And that's going to be under the Advanced tab, by the way. So there's a bunch of extended properties you can select. Just to name a few, would be client IP address, username, server port, server IP address, URI, STEM, protocol status. There's a whole bunch of things you can pick. So once you select what you want it to log, hit OK, and then you've successfully configured SMTP logging. The next recommendation I have for configuring SMTPS on IIS is configuring email routing. So email routing is pretty much telling the SMTP server where to deliver the messages it's received. So you're still going to be in the IIS manager, and where we were in the general tab, you're going to move over to the delivery tab. From the delivery tab, you're going to click on advanced. And then once you click advanced, another screen's going to come up, and there's going to be two boxes of interest for us, and that's the fully qualified domain name box and the smart host box. So you're going to want to type in the server's FQDN, and then you're also going to want to type in the IP address for the smart host. Once you do that, you need to click next, and then you're going to see a new page that comes up, and you're going to click outbound connections. Once you click outbound connections, you're going to make sure that the SMTP port is correct. Now, in the previous slide, I went over some of the ports. Typically, you might be using port 25. In some cases, though, you could set it to port 587 for your TCP port. Then you're going to hit OK, and then a new box or screen is going to show up, and you'll click outbound security. From there, you can choose the authentication that you want. So they have a couple. They have integrated Windows authentication, basic authentication, and others. So you could just click basic authentication, and then you need to type in a username and a password and click OK. Once you've clicked OK, you've successfully configured email routing for SMTPS. For hardening recommendations for SMTPS on IIS, I have three listed. The first one is to require authentication to stop from spam mail. So requiring authentication would mean that only legitimate users or applications would be able to relay messages, and they would be legitimate because they've been authenticated, so you would be able to prevent spam mail and whatnot like that from getting on your server. So the place you would go in order to configure this would be in the etc postfix main.cf, and then you would be looking for the SMTP relay restrictions, and you would be modifying that parameter. The second hardening recommendation I have is whitelisting IP addresses to avoid untrusted addresses from connecting to the server. So we know you can blacklist everything you don't want, but that is pretty unrealistic to be able to make sure you've covered all of your bases for everything you don't want. So a much easier and quicker way is just to whitelist, so you only take in what you do want. So whitelisting IP addresses would be a quick way to harden and strengthen your SMTPS on IIS. The last suggestion I have is disabling any unnecessary features. The point of that would be to minimize your attack surface. I believe I've said it in every presentation now, but being able to minimize your attack surface is a very wise strategy to take, because the less you have to secure, the safer you're probably going to be, because that's less space that an attacker can find a vulnerability and gain access to your system. So to turn off any feature, it's pretty simple. You can use the command systemctl disable and then service and then the name, so service whatever. And then if you want to stop the service, you can type systemctl stop service name and then whatever the name for that service is. So those are two commands you can use to either disable or stop services, which would minimize your attack surface and keep you safer. the initial configuring for SMTPS on postfix is it's quite simple. The steps I have, this is after you've installed it, so I'm not going through the installation process, but there is a very short configuration process that you'll have to do right after you install it, and this will set this will become the default for the system. So the postfix configuration wizard, it may automatically appear after installation, but if it doesn't, you're going to type sudo dpkg reconfigure postfix, and that's going to open the configuration wizard. Now, once that's open, it's not so much commands that you have to type in, it's more so clicking with tab and enter and using the arrow key to select certain things. So under mail configuration, you would, under mail configuration type, you would click internet site, and then you would click OK to move on to the next page. And that'll get you through your first configuration step, and then it's going to automatically take you to another page where under system mail name, you're going to enter the system name that will be used for banners and notifications, and then you'll press tab, select OK, and hit enter to finish the default configuration. So once you've done those steps, you've now successfully configured your postfix system. For hardening recommendations for SMTPS on postfix, there was a couple I was able to find. The first one would be disabling VRFY, which is just shorthand for verify. So why would you want to disable the verify command? The verify command, what it does is it allows you to see if an email address is valid on the mail server. So that can be good and that can be bad. For security, that might not be the best thing, because that means anybody that's like snooping around would be able to tell if there are email addresses that are valid. And if they know that they're valid, they can attempt to send spam to those accounts. So the way you can disable the verify command would be typing post conf-e disable verify command equals yes. So disabling this doesn't actually hurt the delivery between two mail servers, so there's really no point in having it. It's not like it's going to affect any of the connections that you have. The second recommendation I have would be configure postfix to only listen to certain interfaces. So by default, postfix listens to all interfaces, so it's configured to listen to everything. And you might not need it to listen to everything, so you can actually set parameters to what it will and will not listen to. The little snippet I have of code here would be configuring it to only listen to the local interface. So you would be typing post conf-e inet interfaces equals loopback only. So that would make postfix only listen to your local interface as opposed to listening to all interfaces, which is something it does by default. The last recommendation I have would be ensuring that your server is on an open relay system. An open relay system essentially is something that will accept mail and forward mail from everywhere. And you probably don't want that. That's something that spammers can take advantage of. And there's two main ways that you can go about preventing your system from being an open relay system. So you'd be setting or configuring parameters based on network by using the My Network setting. And the other way you can do it is through domains. So that would be the relay domain setting. So those are two different ways you can go about setting parameters so your system is not an open relay system.